Breaking news. Explosions rock Okinawa, sending shockwaves across the region and around the world. The sudden violence has shattered the calm of a tense standoff, and the world is now watching events unfold in real time. Chinese warships have engaged Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the disputed Senkaku Islands, igniting a fierce naval confrontation in the East China Sea. The long-standing territorial dispute has now erupted into open conflict, with both sides exchanging fire. The Pentagon is on high alert, with military command centers across the United States bracing for further escalation. Security has been tightened, and urgent consultations are underway with allies in the region. The unthinkable has happened. A long-simmering dispute has erupted into open warfare. Reports confirm Chinese naval vessels firing on Japanese ships, marking a dramatic escalation. The Japanese government scrambles to respond, holding emergency meetings as the situation deteriorates by the hour. The world holds its breath as two of Asia's most powerful nations are now locked in combat. Grainy footage shows plumes of smoke rising from a Japanese patrol ship, evidence of the ferocity of the opening salvos. The sharp crack of missile fire echoes across the waves as war correspondents report live from the chaos. The Japanese Coast Guard, outgunned and outnumbered, is thrust onto the front line. The Chinese flotilla moves with chilling precision. This is no accident, but a declaration of intent. Japanese crews brace for further attacks, knowing the odds are stacked against them. On Okinawa, air raid sirens wail through the night. Residents scramble for shelter as missile impacts near U.S. military bases spark panic and confusion. Is this a direct attack on American forces, or a calculated warning to stay out? The ambiguity is strategic, leaving both military planners and civilians on edge. For Japanese and American forces, the drill has become real. Decades of peace have shattered in an instant. From Tokyo to Washington, leaders are jolted awake, forced to confront the reality of war. Prime Minister Kishida faces Japan's gravest crisis since World War II, while the White House convenes its top advisors to weigh the next move. In Beijing, official silence reigns, but the Central Military Commission watches its plan unfold with steely resolve. This moment is the result of years of ambition, military modernization, and careful preparation. For President Xi Jinping, it's the culmination of a belief that China's time has come, and that the regional balance of power can be rewritten. The first hours are a stunning success for Beijing, but war is unpredictable, and the world is holding its breath. Crowds gather around screens, watching the headlines flash, and wondering what comes next. The peace of the region is gone, replaced by the chaos and uncertainty of war. The conflict's opening act is over. The real test, and the fate of the region, is about to begin. This conflict's roots run deep, years of nationalism, ambition, and resource competition. At the center is Xi Jinping, who has overseen a sweeping military transformation. Xi's China dream is about restoring dominance in Asia, not just prosperity. The PLA has become a high-tech force, ready for moments like this. The immediate trigger, the disputed Senkaku Islands, rich in resources and national pride. China's cabbage strategy slowly surrounded the islands, but patience ran out. Facing domestic challenges, Xi may have seen war as a way to rally support and cement his legacy. China's plan: a swift, decisive blow to shatter Japan's will and deter U.S. intervention. The strategy relied on surprise and overwhelming force, betting Japan and the U.S. would hesitate. But Beijing underestimated the resolve of free nations under attack. The gamble was high stakes, and the world was about to see if it would pay off. China's leaders believed they were ready for every contingency. They weren't. The attack began before dawn. A Chinese naval task force, disguised as a routine exercise, struck first. Hundreds of missiles launched from China targeted Japanese radar, airfields, and communications, blinding the self-defense forces. Before Japan could respond, their systems were crippled. Simultaneously, Chinese Marines stormed the Senkaku Islands. The few Japanese defenders were overwhelmed. Within an hour, China's flag flew over the islands, broadcast as a historic victory. The PLA's first objective was complete, but the real challenge was holding it. Chinese submarines formed a blockade, denying Japan access. Chinese destroyers engaged Japanese ships, inflicting heavy losses. Cyber attacks deepened the chaos, leaving Japan fighting in the dark. The PLA dared Japan to break the fortress they'd built. The initial shock was total. China owned the first hours. But seizing ground is one thing, holding it against a determined enemy is another. The world watched, waiting for Japan's response. In Tokyo, chaos reigned as news of the attack spread, sending shockwaves through every level of society. Sirens blared, and the city's usual order dissolved into confusion as people scrambled for information and safety. Prime Minister Kishida declared a state of emergency, his voice steady but grave as he addressed a nation on edge. Japan, unaccustomed to war in the modern era, now faced a nightmare scenario it had long hoped to avoid. Fear and disbelief gripped the public as the reality of conflict set in. The self-defense forces, highly trained yet untested in real combat, scrambled to respond, racing against time to organize defenses and protect the homeland. Fighter jets roared into the sky, determined to regain control of the airspace and intercept any threats. Meanwhile, the Navy mobilized at full speed, preparing to challenge the blockade and secure vital sea lanes. The task was daunting. Chinese submarines and missiles threatened every move, making every decision a matter of life and death. Urgent calls went out to Washington, as Japanese officials pleaded for immediate support from their closest ally. The US-Japan Security Treaty was invoked, a historic step that signaled the gravity of the crisis. President Biden received the request. Japan needed immediate help, and the world watched to see how America would respond. China had anticipated this, expanding their defensive perimeter to box in Japanese forces and tighten their grip on the region. Chinese aircraft patrolled aggressively, turning the East China Sea into a deadly kill zone, daring any challenger to approach. For Japan, it was a desperate fight to survive, to hold the line, and to buy precious time for reinforcements to arrive. The nation braced for a long, uncertain struggle, as families huddled in shelters and the streets of Tokyo fell eerily silent. The credibility of the US as an ally was on the line, with the world scrutinizing every move and decision. Every minute counted as the world waited for America's response, the tension mounting with each passing second. The stakes had never been higher. The outcome of this crisis would shape the future of the region and the world. Japan's longest day had just begun, and the world held its breath, uncertain of what the dawn would bring. In Washington, Tokyo's urgent call triggered a series of emergency meetings at the highest levels of government. The Situation Room buzzed with tension as officials scrambled to assess the rapidly unfolding crisis. President Biden now faced a historic and agonizing dilemma, one that would test both his leadership and America's commitments. Honoring the US-Japan Defense Treaty risked a direct confrontation with nuclear-armed China, yet failing to act would shatter decades of US credibility and alliances in the region. The world watched, holding its breath, as America weighed its response. Every move was scrutinized by allies and adversaries alike. The US needed to act decisively, showing strength, but also avoiding a catastrophic all-out war that could engulf the world. The limits of the defense treaty became clear. It demanded action in Japan's defense, but did not automatically require war, leaving room for strategic maneuvering. The Pentagon raised alert levels to their highest in years, signaling the seriousness of the situation. The USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Group, along with its escorts, moved swiftly toward the conflict zone, a visible show of force and commitment. US submarines tracked Chinese naval movements beneath the waves, while intelligence was rapidly shared with Japanese counterparts to coordinate defense. America signaled its intent to defend its ally, but carefully stopped short of direct combat, hoping to deter further escalation. President Biden addressed the nation in a somber televised speech, condemning China's aggression and reaffirming unwavering support for Japan. He called for an immediate ceasefire, but also issued a stern warning to Beijing: do not test America's resolve or the strength of its alliances. Diplomacy raced against the clock with urgent talks underway, even as military preparations accelerated on both sides. The US military machine was awakening, mobilizing forces and readying for any possible outcome. Allies and adversaries alike watched for America's next move, knowing it could reshape the global balance of power. The credibility of the global order built on treaties and alliances was now at stake as the world's institutions scrambled to respond. The crisis was no longer hypothetical, it was unfolding in real time, with every second bringing new risks. The world braced for escalation, as uncertainty rippled through markets and families everywhere watched anxiously. The treaty was on trial, and history was being written in real time. Its outcome uncertain, its consequences potentially world-changing. By day 2, the conflict had spread beyond the Senkakus. Chinese forces pressed their advantage, using their numbers to sustain relentless attacks. Japanese forces, battered but determined, shifted to a defensive strategy. Submarines hunted Chinese threats, ships formed a protective line, Patriot missiles shielded Japan from ongoing strikes. The fight became a brutal battle of attrition. China raced to inflict maximum damage before US intervention. Bombers targeted Japanese naval bases, risking everything to cripple the fleet. The UN was paralyzed, global markets plunged as trade routes became war zones. The conflict was now a global crisis, not just a regional dispute. Pressure mounted on President Biden to act decisively. The window for diplomacy was closing fast. Beijing made a fateful choice: strike US forces before they could intervene. The PLA launched a massive missile barrage at Kadena Air Base and the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Group. Kadena was hit hard, runways cratered, hangars destroyed, fuel depots ablaze. The attack echoed Pearl Harbor, aiming to neutralize US air power in one blow. At sea, the Carrier Group fought for survival against waves of missiles and submarines. US destroyers intercepted many threats, but the carrier was damaged and forced to withdraw. China's preemptive strike was a tactical win, but a strategic disaster. The US was now fully committed. Ambiguity was gone. President Biden announced America was at war. The regional conflict had gone global. China's attempt to deter the US had backfired spectacularly. The stakes had escalated beyond anything Beijing had planned. The world braced for a wider, more devastating war. The era of limited conflict was over. The next phase would decide the fate of the region. The attack on US forces united the alliance. The war was now China versus a coalition: the US, Japan, and South Korea. South Korea, initially hesitant, joined after seeing the threat to its own security. Their Navy and Air Force opened a new front, stretching Chinese resources thin. Allied destroyers formed a formidable missile shield. US bombers struck deep into China. Submarines targeted Chinese shipping, bottling up the PLA Navy. Allied technological and professional superiority began to show. China's miscalculations became clear. The war was no longer short or one-sided. The United Front changed the strategic picture. The conflict was now a prolonged, multi-front struggle. The tide was turning against Beijing. US reinforcements arrived, tipping the balance. Multiple carrier strike groups entered the Western Pacific, bringing overwhelming power. Allied air power gained control of the skies, dismantling China's air defenses. The PLA Navy, once confident, was now trapped and suffering heavy losses. The blockade around the Senkakus was broken, Chinese ships were isolated. Allied forces established a cordon, cutting China off from the Pacific. China's economy, reliant on maritime trade, was strangled by the counter-blockade. The narrative of quick victory vanished, replaced by the reality of a costly war. For all sides, the human and economic toll was staggering. As the conflict entered its second week, China faced a terrible choice: escalate or accept defeat. The initial gamble had failed. The Allies prepared to retake the Senkakus and restore the status quo. The war's outcome would shape the world for decades to come.